Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, cooperative members working together to generate power so you can enjoy the benefits of life in central and western Kansas. Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, energy done right.
Good evening and welcome to the Kansas Legislature. I'm your host, Dr. Jay Steinmetz, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Fort Hays State University. This is our Friday evening call-in show dealing with politics and proceedings of the Kansas Legislature. We have here two excellent representatives of the House of Representatives in Topeka. Joining me on my left, we have Representative Tory Marie Arnberger of the 112th District. That's the district encompassing Great Bend. And we have Representative Stephen Johnson of the 108th District covering Assaria. Welcome, representatives. Thank you for being here on this wonderful evening, talking a little politics and policy. I want to begin with a more broader general question. And to you first, Representative Arnberger, what's the biggest issue? What's the biggest problem facing your constituents right now that you're hearing so much about?
First and foremost is the Department of Labor. And I don't think I've ever worked so much in the off season with constituent services, especially right now with being in session. That's all the phone calls my office assistant is getting, is they can't get through, or they were kicked out, and there's just, it's one thing after another. And so just the Department of Labor has been my biggest headache.
Is there something that the legislature can do? I know this is executive authority, but laws to be passed, pressure to be put on the executive in terms of finding solutions to this problem, aside from just sort of handling some of the logistics and trying to help your constituents as much as possible? Is there something you can do in Topeka?
I think the pressure's there. Mm-hmm. We're definitely talking about it a lot, and on the floor, to the press, to anybody we can, to let them know that we are trying everything we can. The governor is somewhat listening, and so she added additional call center employees, so that's helping out. But this is an issue that it's not. We're not at the very beginning of the pandemic anymore. We're a year in, so we need to be getting solutions. And I just, especially getting the phone calls where I have constituents who they're about to get evicted. They can't feed their kids. Their kids are going. It breaks my heart, and I'm trying everything I can, but there's only so much you can do, and they only have a couple liaisons who are able to answer us, and I get an email back saying, we'll get back to your constituent. It's a 2-week hold. 2 weeks? They need money now. So,
Representative Johnson, thoughts on that, Department of Labor? Anything that can really be done in Topeka aside from handling individual cases, your constituents?
Certainly. So there was a bill that the Commerce Committee did to work to restructure, particularly the funding, how we would handle setting money back into the fund, given the fraud that was occurring through the last year. And it was going to be critical that there were still funds there. And that was one that the legislature was able to address. We had talked about whether we could have a different call center than the one that is there. Can we get someone else that can answer the calls and actually get back? It isn't impossible to do that, and there are call centers that are available. Working through the fraud was certainly an issue. That did slow things down, but it shouldn't still be slowing things down. They were slow, I would say, in our department to implement the changes. When we saw them implemented the end of January, we saw the amount of fraud that we were apparently dealing with really fall off a cliff. So it wasn't impossible to address, but we probably didn't address it until something close to $500 million was out the door. Mm-hmm. And that's a big issue for us to address as a state, as well as most importantly at the individual level where people need the help to get it. So we'll continue to talk to the Department of Labor and say, what can you do? I've asked for just a day for an hour when I could walk over see what the operation is there. I understand that I think it's Accenture is a company that has the call center, so I can't see that, but I'd really like to get a better handle on how that works. The chair of the Commerce Committee went very deep on the issue and was good at helping to identify the fraud and identify the need to close that door.
Other issues out there that you're getting in terms of constituents, problems, issues that you're receiving right now?
Well, there are several related to the pandemic in terms of, what do we do? How do we keep things open? How do we keep things safe? How do we continue to move forward together? And that bumps into different things, control between the state, control between local entities. We have additional funds that are coming from the federal government, trying to figure out how to most efficiently allocate those so that they can meet the federal guidelines to address issues that we have in the state and best meet those needs that people are having. One thing that will be done with it is backfill some of those unemployment dollars to make sure that that can continue to pay out, not only right now as we need it, but continuing forward.
On the pandemic, are we at a stage right now where we need to be lifting all restrictions, mask ordinances? What are your thoughts on that, Representative Arnberger?
I wouldn't say that we're back to normal. I do appreciate the county by county approach. Obviously, my county, Barton County, is going to be different than Ellis, than Sedgwick County. So I also think that on top of it, that there isn't a mask mandate in one of those counties, but still certain businesses can still state, no, I feel safer if you wear a mask. And so I think it's up to the certain businesses, and I think that's the number one topic is just mask mandates. Mm-hmm. And so we know that the governor's going to reissue another mask mandate April 1st. And so, but then on top of that, counties have to again opt in or opt out of it. So it doesn't, because it is a brand new executive order.
What's the rationale with local option with regards to a pandemic? I mean, I understand local option obviously is a good and suitable solution to a lot of different issues. But with regards to the pandemic, what's the rationale? One side of the coin would be the idea that this is a highly infectious upper respiratory virus and it affects everybody roughly the same. What would be the rationale for a local option when it comes to those kinds of restrictions, mask ordinances?
Well, I mean, Gove County has a lot less population than Ellis County, than Sedgwick County, than Johnson County. Some counties have zero active cases. So why should they have to have a mask mandate when they have zero active cases? Some counties, they are a hot spot. So you have to take the extra precautions. So.
Representative Johnson, any thoughts?
Yeah, a year ago I was one of those that was saying that Wyandotte and Wallace County are not the same in what they face, in the population density, how things might be more readily transmitted or not. We certainly discovered that being rural, we are not immune from it, as we saw some of our rural counties with high percentages of infection rate at some point. Thankfully, we have not had as many more recently, which has been very encouraging. It's been encouraging in the legislature. I wasn't sure we'd be able to go this long without having some outbreak with the proximity that we have. And we continue to learn more as we go along with the pandemic. Given the differences, and as Representative Arnberger said, I really think it does come down to what are we comfortable with in this setting? Is this a place where it's okay that we can communicate? Does the mask get somewhat in the way of speaking clearly and even getting the full expression that is there? So do I want a mandate that says at all times in all places it's there? Or do I hope that we can exercise the judgment that we need in some places? And I know that's hard, but I have been a supporter of the local control to say what fits in this scenario. I think that there was a purpose to the mask. I think that they might help, and I mostly want things to stay open. For me, it's not a huge issue to wear one. Not true for everybody. Some people, they really bother. But if it will keep things open, I'm willing to try it. And become so polarizing whether or not to have a mask that I think it gets ever harder to have a mandate from ever higher that people will really embrace, follow. I think it's going to come down to us saying, we think it helps in this scenario, we're going to agree to do it, or we're going to agree that we're not going to mandate it and go forward under that plan.
So it sounds like, Representative Johnson, maybe you're a little more reluctant to think about local option with regards to the pandemic than you were a year ago. Is that kind of what you were implying? And
no, I'd still think of local option as I did a year ago. In that, again, the response to things such as the mask are so, again, polarizing that the more that a mandate comes down, an edict either direction, I think is challenging. I think it comes down for us saying at Representative Arnberger's grocery store, hypothetical, she doesn't have a grocery store, you are or you aren't going to be required to wear a mask, and I will react accordingly on whether or not I patronize that. Anyway, I think it is now very hard to make a mass rule either way that will be followed.
Yeah, it's you mentioned polarizing, and I get the sense that maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe there are a lot of issues in our politics today that shouldn't be so politicized. We also have a high degree of distrust in our political authority by a lot of measures, all-time highs. Is this a big problem for you as a representative, and are there actions that you can take as an elected official that can instill some trust in government, be it state government and local government, instill some trust in political authority? Representative Arnberger, thoughts?
I think, so one thing that we've noticed a lot is, how polarizing it is. And so 3 years ago, we started the Future Caucus in Kansas. Mm-hmm. And so the Future Caucus is members under the age of 40, and it's bipartisan. And the main reason behind this, and it's brought to us by the Millennial Action Project, which when they started it, that was when millennials were getting into office. Well, now we're getting to the point where we're having Gen Zs, and so I don't know if they're going to change their name or not. But it has really, we passed bipartisan legislation this year. We're trying to find common ground. What we do is we take the issues that we're not going to agree on. We're not going to agree on guns, on abortion, on taxes, but there are issues we are going to agree on. No media ever talks about the 90% of bills that are passed 125 to 0. Mm-hmm. All that is enticing is the 80 to 39 vote. And so what we have done is we said, okay, the one that we agreed upon was the first-time homeowner savings account bill. That will definitely help our generation, and let's get it passed in Kansas, and let's have the option to start utilizing this, and hopefully that'll keep bringing Kansans and to stay in Kansas. And so that was an issue that we've been talking about. Another one is the rural versus urban divide. Mm-hmm. That I am very surprised on how many of my urban friends have come up to me and said, Tory, I have no idea what this farming bill does. Can you please help me? I am not the best, but at least I am honored that they asked me, and I go to them. Same on whenever there's aviation tax credits, I go to Wichita. That's going to help them out more than anything. So,
yeah, I was meaning to ask you this because I'd read that you were at one of the members of the Future Caucus.
Yes.
And we do have this age-old problem in politics of getting young people active in politics, getting them engaged, getting them interested in politics. How do we get our young people today active and involved in politics and even running for office?
So I think one of the major things, obviously in college, a lot of us who are in now, we're in student government. And so we always had that little drive and enjoyed being involved on the government standpoint. I think the other thing is just having real conversations with, I go and visit my high school seniors every year and just do a Kansas Politics 101. And it's different than reading a textbook. When I'm able to come in, I have them debate a bill. And we go back and forth, and I let them vote. And so I always pick a bill that we're working that session. And so to them, it's something different in class. It's exciting. They get to hear about what we do in Topeka. A lot of them, I even had some of them come up and be my interns. And so it's just, I think that's just the first step. And we have a group, the Young Republicans, and there's also Young Democrats, getting them involved in those and starting at the county level. So.
Let's talk about voting rights, voting access. This is an important issue both nationally and here in Kansas. A bill to narrow the ballot counting window that would give you a certain number of days for it to go through the USPS to be counted. That bill had gone through the Federal and State Affairs Committee in the Senate, and some estimates suggest that if that bill had been in effect in November 2020, there'd be about 32,000 votes that would be affected by that. There's about 32,000 votes that were postmarked before 7 p.m. on Election Day, but went through the mail and were only received thereafter. Thoughts on this bill? Support for this bill, Representative Johnson?
Well, it's just come out of the Senate committee, so it has a ways to go. But as either rule can work, people just have to know what it is going in. So in general, I think that our Secretary of State, our county clerk, did a good job through the election. While it would be hard to swear that every vote was absolutely perfect to the last vote, count can be off. I don't think we had an issue with fraud in Kansas. So I don't know that it's a critical issue for us to get passed. I know there were issues in other states that may have been more severe. If I know what the rules are going in, I think I know to mail my ballot for Election Day. So I would hope that if it would go through, those 32,000 votes would not necessarily be lost. But we just need to know what it is up front. For me, in short, I don't think there is an issue with fraud. I think some people have become accustomed to, I can mail my ballot on Election Day, and I would be comfortable continuing forward that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of study on this issue in political science. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest any widespread fraud or illegality in our election system. Every election has elements of fraud, but those are usually very isolated and not coordinated. Thoughts on that, Representative Arnberger? Thoughts on this bill? Support for it?
I think one thing I kind of read briefly, the Sunflower Journal, when they published it today. I know some of the issues that came forward is it a clear postmark? Because sometimes it gets smudged. Is it, how do you know, for instance, my question is, where I work, we have a postmark machine. So how do you know it was that I didn't postmark that at 8 o'clock p.m., not 7 o'clock p.m.? Because it still has the same date. So just the hypotheticals there. When it comes over, if it comes over to Fed and State, I'm on that committee, looking forward to hearing it. Might go to elections, but with how late in the session it is, if it passes the Senate, then it's conferenceable. It kind of stinks that we won't be able to fully vet it on the House side. But
what might be the rationale for a bill that narrows this? That's kind of what I'm getting at. What's the rationale for this? The concern on the other side is you don't want to limit access of registered voters and their votes and their valid votes. What would be the rationale for closing this window?
I just want to make sure that all votes are valid.
Mm-hmm.
That is huge for me. Everybody has a story. Everybody, then at the same time with it, everybody has a story. Everybody heard a rumor. Is it true? What this voter fraud situation that happened in Michigan, that happened, and where are you getting your sources? That's the number one thing. It feels like a lot what that happened in the 2020 election. I was following it. A lot of it. I mean, a lot of us were awake at 2 p.m. trying to wait, and we wake up and all of a sudden there's all these votes. So of course that is very concerning. But at the same time, we also do have Secretary of States for each state. Mm-hmm. They're doing their job.
Audit process, court process, legal process, all that stuff.
Yes, so.
Large dumps of ballots in the middle of the night are not unusual for election nights as well, as people who pay attention to elections and watch them, especially in urban areas like Milwaukee County. We've got a caller on the line here. Dawn from Downs is on line 1. Dawn, what is your question? Good evening.
Thank you for taking my question. My question is in regards to Senate Bill number 279. Why would the legislature want to jeopardize an industry that has been very beneficial to Kansas in the past?
That's a great question, Don. I believe this is the windmill energy, wind energy. Is that correct, Don, if you're still on the line there?
Yes, that's correct.
This bill would put a lot of restrictions on wind farms, where they can be, how far they can be from various different localities. There's a concern that this bill is being supported by other energy interests, and that's what really is going on here. Wind is number one energy source in the state of Kansas. I believe only 2 states in the United States, it's Kansas and Iowa. Number one source of energy comes from wind. Don's question there, let's go with Representative Johnson first. Thoughts on this, concerns about this bill? Wind energy has been good to Kansas in terms of the economy. Do we need to, is this the time, and what's the rationale for putting some restrictions and regulations on wind energy?
So I was trying to look up Senate Bill 279. Thanks for the overview that you have on it. If it's the restrictions that I've heard in general, that is siting and various things where there are groups, a remarkable number of different groups that don't want the siting of the windmills in their sightlines. And if that is the part, I think there are some groups that might have some valid concerns of where those might go. And I'd be willing to listen to those. Wind has been useful in a lot of counties for revenue. The development has added value there. And so where they want to embrace it, I think that is a great solution for those communities. And if, again, on the local control piece, if there are some issues that happen either within a community or whatever is there, I might listen to that much. I'm not sure what other restrictions are there, but I'll see what I can find on it.
Yeah, that brings up the question of whether or not we should have a broad statewide based piece of legislation and not a local option and local control if counties or communities have concerns about it. And while wind has been good for the Kansas economy and Kansas generally, there are groups out there who are very concerned about restrictions and the various different sort of realities that wind turbines bring. Thoughts on this, Representative Arnberger?
I think, again, local control. Your county commissioners, they know their county best compared to the state. So that's something where I think if you're upset about it, go to your county commissioners, have the local control there. I agree. I think that we are lucky to be able to have a natural resource. Wind is heavily here in Kansas, and why not utilize what we can with it and have wind turbines? I know there's also on top of it, there already are restrictions on, I know in Barton County we have the wetlands, and so we have Cheyenne bottoms and whooping cranes. So no, they're not allowed because we are preserving that. So there already are some restrictions. I remember hearing when I first came in the big divide between Lincoln County and Ellsworth County when they added the wind turbines, and I believe that was a local control situation as well. So
does that make it a little less likely that you would support this bill in Topeka because you would support more local option on this issue?
I'm not supporting that bill.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Thoughts on that, Representative Johnson?
And I see it had a fairly lengthy hearing in the Senate, but has not been voted on even in the committee yet. So it's got a long ways to go to make it anywhere this session. Mm-hmm. Again, I'd look at what's in the bill, but I want the counties to have that control. I want them to think about where the transmission lines go. We've had issues with that different places. Not only the major lines, but some of the smaller ones when the county says, oh, let's just put them in the road right away. And all of a sudden they run into some issues there. And thankfully the neighborhoods are able to react and say, that plan's not going to work. Why don't we try this one? And that often is better handled in a partnership than with state mandating a solution.
Let's shift gears slightly. Instead of thinking about local control versus state legislature, let's think about legislature versus executive branch powers. And in particular, I'm interested in your thoughts on the emergency orders and executive action in a time of emergency. There have been there's been a bit of a tussle and a fight between the Kansas Legislature and Governor Kelly's office on the issue of where those powers lie. And the theory here is that executive power is better suited to handling quick responses needed in emergencies. Legislatures, by their nature, tend to move a little more slowly than executive power. Executive power has enforcement power and all these other things as well, which make it easier to deal with emergencies. Will limiting the governor's emergency powers in this pandemic potentially create problems in a future emergency under a future governor? Thoughts on this, Representative Arnberger?
I think with the KEMA bill that we passed, I like the fact that with executive orders that the LCC can look over it. I think the balance of the checks and balances, it's there. Same with our 3 branches of government. We have checks and balances there. It allows that if one of the if the governor, say the shoe's on the other foot, say we have a Republican governor, and they went way too far, at least we have the discussion and we can look over that executive order underneath the new KEMA bill, and I support that.
Representative Johnson, thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that was a balance that became evident that we needed some adjustments as we entered the pandemic a year ago. The emergency powers of the governor in responding to an emergency are still pretty much the same. And we were used to short-term emergencies that we had to respond to a fire, whatever those things were. We weren't used to one that went on for a series of months, and that's where it became a little less clear where all of that power should reside and how long we might declare an emergency for any one of us to have that control. So, and in particular on the bill, while there are a lot of things that are difficult to come through, I think that we as a state were well served by our Judiciary Chair, Fred Patton, who really did work with a lot of different entities, who really did work to find the long view and say, how do we work through this so that it can work better in the long run? I am confident that nobody got everything that they wanted in that Kansas Emergency Management Act. There were folks wanting it to be far more restrictive on the governor, and I think Fred navigated a narrow road to one that can work.
And I think on top of that, we always need to remember we're frustrated now, but again, in 2022, if we do have a new governor, 2026, shoe is on the other foot. Mm-hmm. How would we want to have these powers, this authority distributed? And so that is one thing I think that Representative Fred Patton, he looked at the long run. He made sure that he was working with everybody on it, and it wasn't just one-sided. And I feel confident that we had the best person in the job on the House side to be there in conference committee and to negotiate the bill that we got passed.
Yeah, as a professor of American politics, I often say one of the golden rules of politics is what goes around comes around. And so making decisions in the present, always have to sort of think about what the implications are those decisions going to be in the future. Let's switch to a different issue. An important issue for Kansans, Medicaid expansion. Do you support Medicaid expansion? Why or why not? And in particular, now with the pandemic and with the stimulus aid bill that has come out of Washington, there's even more federal sweeteners for Medicaid expansion. There's even more dollars there that are on the table. This has been implemented in a lot of states, a lot of conservative states, and the consequences of the implementation of Medicaid expansion seem on the whole to be positive. But what are your thoughts about it? Support for it? Why not? Representative Arnberger, your thought first? I
don't support it. I haven't supported it from the get-go. There's a lot more to it than just getting federal dollars. It's going to cost a lot more than people think that it does. And the one thing that drives me crazy when somebody says, well, just give it a couple years, and if it doesn't work, we'll pull it back. No, there's no way you're going to take somebody's insurance away. And so there's a lot that needs to be studied with it. I have said if there's a funding mechanism, and it is a positive funding mechanism, it's not going to run out in 5 years, I'd be interested in learning about it and what can go forward. I'm on the health committee. This is my 3rd year. I've done a lot of deep dives. My freshman year, I had no idea. I was 23 years old trying to learn the legislature and learning about Medicaid expansion. And I remember we voted on it in February of my freshman year. And I was up for 2 to 3 days just trying to figure out what is this policy. And so the very first time I voted for it because I never heard from the other side. And once I heard from the other side on the veto, I realized I don't support this. And that is the one vote to this day I still regret that I voted for. So I don't support it. But again, if there was a funding mechanism, and I've said that from the get-go.
Representative Johnson, thoughts on Medicaid expansion?
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack with Medicaid expansion, and Representative Arnberger goes deeper than I with the Health Committee on it. I have voted for it. I have supported it and would plan to continue. I think it will continue, although it's a very legitimate concern to say, do I know that funding will be there in 5 years? With the majority of states now participating, I think it's going to be the law of the land and that those dollars will continue, but there is no guarantee. As such, I see Kansas contributing to the costs at the federal level. And if we are going to pay for it for 31 states, I would consider being among those states that get the benefit. If we look at what the benefit would have been over the years that it has been available, it would be significant and it would mean a lot to many of our rural healthcare centers. And for that, while it is not a solution to the healthcare issues we have, and it's critical when we look at it to not say, well, this will fix it, it does give us more flexibility to do more things. And at the same time, we have to keep seeking how do we solve the healthcare issue of cost and providing what we need across the state. But nonetheless, I think it is a tool that we could use, given that we'll pay some fraction of the 31 states. If I were at the federal level, which I am not, I'm not sure where I would have come up with the money to be able to say we can do this. I worry about that. I worry about the stimulus funds that come out and how that affects future generations. Given that it is happening, that's where I would say, okay, we're far enough down the road and far enough out on the tail of what's happening that I'm not sure I can wag that dog and change it back.
Yeah, a lot has been said about rural hospitals and the potential benefit, and rural hospitals are suffering a great deal, especially out here in western Kansas. But there's also, you mentioned with Medicaid expansion, just the fact of bringing in a lot of dollars into the Kansas economy. These are issues that don't shake you. What are your thoughts about this, Representative Arnberger? Rural hospitals, the amount of money, and if you can provide, what's your estimate for what the cost of Medicaid expansion would be for Kansas?
So KHI did a study a couple years ago, I think it was last year or the year before, and it's $52 million is what it's going to cost us. And so in the end, it's $105 million, but that the 105 has what we would be receiving in Kansas. So it's $52 million is what the state would have to pay for.
And the federal benefit sweetener prior to the COVID stimulus would be around $350 million or so.
So, and that was just the 105 million was how much it would cost, and then to start it all off, that's when you'd get the 50, whatever 105 minus 52 is. We'd get that from the federal government to get it started, and then you have the more coming down. I have talked to rural hospitals. I've had them come in. They won't. I've had quite a few come up and say they won't say publicly that it would not have saved their hospital, but they have said it wasn't. Medicaid expansion wouldn't have saved Independence Hospital. Medicaid expansion wouldn't have saved some of these hospitals that shut down. If you look at other states, rural hospitals are still shutting down and they've expanded Medicaid. So to say that it's going to save rural hospitals is not true.
It's not going to harm rural hospitals. We could safely say that.
It would help. Free money is going to help everything, but it's not going to save them.
We have a caller here on line 1, Donna from Great Bend. Good evening. What is your question?
As I understand, there is a proposal by the Senate President to initiate an office in the state of Kansas, an Office of Child Advocate, and interest in that office would answer to the Attorney General. I'm just interested to hear if there's any comments by either one present here today on that new office.
And Donna, you said the office is child advocacy?
Yes.
I haven't heard of any of that, but it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Representative Johnson, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that idea. Again, I haven't heard that from our Senate leadership of what they're looking at. There are a number of oversight groups that I think do a good job and really have helped to move that forward. I think there's a foster care oversight, which is one step, certainly not the complete part, but how that might work together. Anyway, I'm guessing this is going, if it's with the Attorney General, it would be more in the judicial system and how to help children in that situation. But
And
Just-
I was just saying, I've been on general government budget the past 3 years, and we look at the Attorney General's budget. The two budgets I feel, the two offices I feel sorry for is the Attorney General and Secretary of State, because it seems like, oh, we want to have this idea, you guys get it, figure out how you guys want to figure. I mean, the Secretary of State is in charge of so many things. Attorney General, I think they're up to 12 different divisions now. We have a really good Secretary of State and Attorney General, and they're able to handle it. I used to be on the board for the Family Crisis Center in Great Bend, and I think that would go hand in hand with the Attorney General, since he hands out multiple grants that help out the Family Crisis Center, which is an advocacy. So I think that is a great idea. I wish I knew more about it.
To add a little bit, or to build on Donna's question, the House recently rejected Governor Kelly's executive reorganization that would have merged the Department of Children and Families with the Department of Aging and Disability into one single agency, Kansas Department of Human Services. Administrative mergers usually result in administrative efficiency, potential cost savings down the road, but there was concerns about this bill. What are those concerns? Did you vote to reject, and what was the rationale there, Representative Arnberger?
I voted to reject it. I think that we're just adding more bureaucracy, and it didn't work before. So I think that having the two separate is exactly what we need. Governor Kelly already has the same secretary for both. So I've heard that has been helpful on the pointing fingers, because that happens all the time in politics and all the time in government, is, well, oh, it's not my problem, it's so-and-so's problem. I know it's helped out there, but at the same time, I don't, they already are two very large agencies, and I don't think we should have one mega agency over it.
Two agencies pointing fingers at each other sounds like bureaucratic inefficiency. Representative Johnson, thoughts on that? And did you vote for it?
I did not vote for the merger, and as we looked at it in appropriations, where we started on some of those discussions and had a chance to hear from them, one of the challenges is trying to break down the budget and understand where things are going and what they need to do, and both of those have tremendous needs, and trying to figure out how to work with that is one of the reasons that I think it has been split for. And it was the oversight piece that drove the decision to continue where it was. Certainly don't mean to build any fences on the ability to communicate between those entities. And there may be efficiencies in terms of the net budget. I don't believe there is a difference in the budget. I think the budget was held the same, although the organization would come together. I actually think we have a good, a capable secretary that's working there, definitely very dedicated. So it came down to oversight and trying to break it down. Similarly, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, another really important entity for us to have in Kansas, really large, and trying to find, and there really are times both in looking at assets, in balancing that need between handling the regulations that we do need at the state level and interacting consistently with citizens whom we are actually serving. It can get harder as the entity gets.
Let's return very briefly to Medicaid expansion. Just one thought on this. Governor Kelly had floated a proposal. I know it likely is going nowhere in practical sense, but a proposal to link Medicaid expansion with the implementation of medical marijuana in Kansas. Tax revenues from medical marijuana going to cover the state's obligation of some $52 million for Medicaid expansion. You mentioned before, Representative Arnberger, you might be open to Medicaid expansion if there were a funding mechanism there. Does that sound like an attractive proposal to you?
Not really. Just because that does violate the two-subject rule. where she has Medicaid expansion and medical marijuana. So in the end, we're working medical marijuana right now in Fed and State, and I'm sure there's going to be an amendment brought forward to link in Medicaid expansion. We're supposed to be passing it out next week. I'm sure we haven't had the debate on the floor. The Senate has on Medicaid expansion, and it failed with only 12 votes. We've done a good job this year with blocking it on the House floor. It's not that we're against debating it. It's just the fact the votes aren't there, and why waste the time if the votes aren't there when we had that happen the other day on the House floor with a House concurrent resolution that we had to miss all of our 1:30 committee meetings and our 3:30 committee meetings were starting late. So anyways, I get where she's coming from because she knows that's the number one thing that people were saying is that they want a funding mechanism, but that's not the funding mechanism that I would agree with.
Fall 2020 Docking Institute, of which I'm a policy fellow, has a Kansas Speak survey. They were published in the fall of 2020. 63.5% of respondents in that survey supported expanding Medicaid in Kansas. That's a pretty good, solid majority in a polarized political environment. 63.5%. Thoughts on Governor Kelly's proposal of linking it? The rationale here is it's not quite two subjects because medical marijuana is a medical policy issue, and Medicaid expansion quite obviously is as well. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll break it down to your first question on where I am on medical marijuana, and then the combination, is that the best route?
Yeah.
I would support a medical marijuana plan. The key to me on it has always been, how do you distribute it? If there is a way to distribute that product as I would oxycodone or other painkillers through pharmacies where it's controlled, I think it's useful to have the choice. I think it may be better than the opioids for some needs, and I'd like to have that available. I'm not the one that wants to go try 5 products and see what works for me. I want somebody to say, take X milligrams of this instead of the other product in a similar distribution method, and I think that would be useful for the state to have. Changing to a more open distribution system concerns, as I'm not for the recreational side, but there are products I think are useful and helpful and actually could address a number of issues if we can just figure out that distribution model. Many times, I don't believe it's the case with this one, in the past it has been tied to a myriad of other issues that have been concerning as you read through the bill and you see it's got a tie to energy policy or other. Wow, that's too far afield. But if we could accomplish that, I think it'd be a useful thing. To tie it to Medicaid, okay, fine. For me,
you support both of them independently, so.
Right? But I can use that revenue for a whole variety of things. So I tend to be, we got $7.5 billion in the state general fund. How are we going to allocate it? And that's where I like to come against it, rather than saying, well, this is what we often have, or here's an assemblage of a whole bunch of ideas that may or may not add up to $7.5 billion at the end of the day. And that's the criteria that I like to follow along and see what other things are on the table, and based on that, how far down the list are we able to go.
Let's put this on the back burner and come back to medical and recreational marijuana. We got a caller on line 1, Brian from Salina. Good evening, Brian. What is your question?
In recent years, the legislature and the KCC have really undermined the incentives for people to generate their own electricity. Can you do something about that, please?
A number of states have restrictions, and Kansas is one of them, about generating your own electricity and even selling electricity back to utility companies. Brian's probably referring to solar, but we can do this with wind and other resources as well. What are your thoughts on this? Is this an economic and individual liberty issue of being able to harness resources of the natural world and use them for your own energy use and selling back to utilities? Thoughts on this, Representative Arnberger?
I don't know enough about it to speak one way or another. I know I've heard there was a bill that had to deal with solar, and it was in Fed State last year or 2 years ago, that had to deal with the fact that you shouldn't be charged because you have solar panels. I see where they're coming from with that. we didn't have a hearing on it. I just remember I got lobbied on it from the, I think the clean energy folks. And so it sounds, I get where Brian's coming from, but I don't know enough to say one way or another where I'm at. When it comes to energy, that's kind of over my head.
Maybe less in terms of politics, but more in terms of your personal life. Would you feel, if you decided to put up solar panels in your home or had property sufficient for a wind turbine or something like that, do you feel like you should have the ability to have some say over the consumption of that energy?
I would want it for my house. I don't know how I feel about selling it, but.
Mm-hmm. Representative Johnson, thoughts on this?
So I'm not sure where we are on it and haven't been on the energy and utilities piece, but I think you have the option to put up the power that you want. Whether there is a cost to be able to do that, I think at one point there was some charge to happen for that. I don't know if that makes sense or not, or if it is. And then the next piece is, what is the net metering arrangement that makes sense for everyone? Given that a utility has to be able to provide whatever is demanded, what is the cost to have that ability? And I recognize that I maybe can't expect to get that for free in case I need more than my usual rate. But it would seem like there's some ability that I pay the retail rate when I use power from the grid, and perhaps I can get a wholesale rate if I'm able to put power back on the grid. And I think that's the direction that had been going in general, but I don't remember if there was some cost to be able to hook me up, and whether or not that is where the issue is in the process. But I'd be happy to talk to Brian more about it, see what next step he'd like to take.
Can we take medical marijuana off the back burner, put it on the front again? Your thoughts on medical marijuana? You've been in committee looking at this. Do you support medical marijuana? How can we implement it to the benefit of Kansans?
So I support medical marijuana if it's medical marijuana and not just one step away from recreational. That's exactly what's going on in Oklahoma. And that is what we're looking at, how do we not be like Oklahoma? So as of right now, it's getting a lot of traction. We have lots of amendments. Of course, anybody wants to amend it as much as they can. One of the things for me is I want to regulate it, but it gets to the point where it gets over-regulated that it's a non-starter. So I don't want us to pass medical marijuana and then make it so the fees are so ridiculously high that nobody can produce it. What's the point in that? And that's what happened in Ohio, but that is what we're basing our bill off of. So in Ohio's already had 2 or 3 trailer bills to fix what they messed up. And so that's what we're doing right now, is trying to figure out a way to make sure it is regulated so it's not recreational, but take away some of those regulations so it's not overly regulated.
And I get the sense you're not for recreational marijuana.
No.
In the Kansas Speak survey published in fall 2020, again, I was absolutely shocked by this number. 66.9% of Kansans in the Kansas Speak survey strongly support or somewhat support legalization of recreational marijuana for individuals 21 and older and allowing for the taxation by the state. 66.9%, that's higher than support for Medicaid expansion. Thoughts on this? Does that change your mind at all if we see solid majorities in support for something like recreational? Or what might change your mind, some of the implications and consequences from other states with regards to recreational marijuana that we see in Colorado? South Dakota now has recreational marijuana, hardly a progressive liberal bastion up there in South Dakota. Thoughts on that?
I still don't support recreational marijuana. I'm shocked with those numbers. I know that it's in the 70s for medical marijuana. I think the other thing you have to think about too when it comes to surveys is how was the question asked, because that does come off quite a bit, and especially to people are known, legislators are known for when their surveys come out and they're asking their constituents, do you believe one way or another? How was the question worded? Because sometimes it sounds great in theory, but in the end, that's not what they're really asking.
Yeah, this is Docking Institute again, Fort Hays State University, published online. You can see the question itself. 66.9% Representative Johnson, thoughts on recreational marijuana?
Yeah, I'm going to want to dig further into that one before I change my position to be for recreational marijuana. Perhaps there's something more there that people are seeing that we haven't, but I'd hold off on that. One thing that would start to change my position, save all of the other stuff, if we are surrounded by states that have recreational marijuana, it becomes entirely too hard to enforce, and the pressure I would get to us to just say, okay, we've got to join with the rest of them that are there. So as that closes in, I think it will change us, but I don't think we'll be a state that leads to recreation.
Surrounding two, are there any concern there about losing tax revenue with regards to not having?
There is, because there are tax revenues that are there. However, there are also costs that come along with it. I know the Colorado model hasn't been free of other issues that came along with the revenue that was.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to a caller. We've got two callers, actually. Art from Larned on line 1. Good evening, Art. What is your question?
Okay, I have a question for Representative Arnberger. I'd like to go back to something she said a little while ago about the bill that changes the voting in our state and 42 other states, when she mentioned that there is no evidence of any voter fraud, widespread voter fraud. So why is Kansas and these 42 other states, why does she think they're all changing their voting rules now?
Great question there from Art. It is true. We don't have a lot of evidence of widespread voter fraud, but we're seeing a pretty strong wave of voter suppression happening through the states. The Georgia State Legislature has been all over the national news. I believe that bill makes it a crime to hand a bottle of water to somebody standing in line waiting to vote. I know that's not the extreme one being discussed here in the Kansas Legislature, but again, it comes back to the rationale. What's the rationale for limiting this window with registered voter voting by mail, postmarks that ballot by 7 p.m. the election day? What's the concern about that, Representative Arnberger?
I just want to make sure that they are legitimate votes, and on top of that, how many people received mail-in ballots that never asked for one? I know that happened a lot in Barton County. I had a lot of people ask me about it. They said, I never signed up for this. Well, I got it. And so that worries me. With mail-in ballots really worry me. And so I want to make sure that we are as strict as possible with it. I know Kansas does have very strict voter laws compared to some other states. I don't know if it's North Dakota or South Dakota, where they don't. You can register to vote, I believe, the day that you go and go vote.
About 17 states, I think, have same-day registration. So
we did, when I went to a BUILD conference, which is in the Northwest, well, not Northwest, I guess it would be the Midwest, North Midwest. We had 13 states and 3 provinces from Canada come down to a 5-day conference, and it's just, it's 3 people from each state, and we just talk about certain things like that. And so that's something that we were talking about just with other states.
Well, let's squeeze in one more caller here. We got a couple of minutes left. Melinda from Luray, line 2. Good evening, Melinda. What is your question?
My question is in regard to the Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Partnership, and I don't know if anyone has asked any questions about that, as I had my TV turned down. But my question is, what is your opinion on the Kansas-Nebraska Heritage Partnership? Several people are, there are several meetings in the northern part of the state to address that, and people seem to be a little bit upset about it and don't really understand what is, understand what it is setting out to do.
Can you briefly, Melinda, give us some sense of what it is setting out to do?
I'm sorry, I can't understand you.
Oh, sorry. Melinda, can you briefly tell us or explain, give us some sense of what it is trying to do, the Heritage Project between Kansas and Nebraska?
Well, they're talking about promoting tourism and the heritage in Kansas and Nebraska. But there's also something being said that they will want to zone certain areas for energy, and that there are some that are behind it that want to eliminate the use of barbed wire fencing. And so people in the agricultural community are very concerned.
Great specific question there. We have Representative Johnson doing his homework right now, looking up this question. Initial thoughts, broad thoughts, Representative Arnberger?
This is news to me. I could see you trying to promote tourism, absolutely, but.
Very quick words. We've got about 40 seconds left. Representative Johnson, anything you want to add?
I literally got one email that had this tagline in it today for the first time, and it looks like it's north central Kansas into south central Nebraska. And if I've looked up the right thing, apparently the National Park Service is designating these things, and it just sounds like something we need to have a handle on for what is being designated, what control, if any, the National Park Service has, but something that we will be able to look into. So now that we're aware of it. So thank you for that call.
Great stuff. Good questions. Wide-ranging. Lots of different policy issues. Had a good time as well. Thank you so much. Again, I'm Jay Steinmetz, host of the Kansas Legislature. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, cooperative members working together to generate power so you can enjoy the benefits of life in central and western Kansas. Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, energy done right.